Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
We're here today with Phil Anthony, fan of the show. Isn't that cool that we have fans of our show? Fan of the show, who reached out to contact when he moved to Nashville. So I thought we should start a segment where we sort of welcome to Nashville. I think Phil is representative of so many people around the country that are on the verge or about to or considering or thinking about moving to New York, LA, Nashville. But the difference is people don't do it. I would have to guess out of 100, maybe you get 3 to 5 that actually get their butts in a car and drive to Nashville and do it. Phil did that. So that separates him from the pack. So that makes me like him already. Besides that, he's a great dude. He's a sweetheart. He reached out. He's been hanging out. He's sitting behind me while I'm mixing and doing stuff. He's showing up at the podcast to help out whenever he can and doing all the things that Mike and I and other engineers say sort of deliver or create successful people. He has all those traits. He's a great bass player, session bass player from New York. He's still doing a ton of work out of New York and is moving into Nashville session scene. I saw that he was in a session. He had Tom Bukovac playing on a record of his on Monday. So it seems like he's meeting all the right people and doing all the right things. We'd like to welcome Phil Anthony to the program. Thanks, Phil.
Oh, man. Thank you, guys. I'm a huge fan of the podcast. And honestly, moving down here, seeing the podcast before I moved was one of the reasons why I actually pulled the trigger and was like, all right, I'm gonna take a chance. I saw Mark Hill and Gordon, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go for it.
It's cool, man.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep, yeah. It's great to see the podcast actually making some impact on people's lives. But here's what we want to know from you. I think what would be cool is like, okay, we're gonna also have Eli Dykstra, who is our engineer for the podcast, but also is a sort of a viral guitar player. Young prodigy electric guitar player. He's also moved to Nashville from Iowa. So I just thought, man, wouldn't it be cool to have these folks on? And then it's like, ask them what their fears are, what their expectations are, what they've been surprised about since moving to town, what they didn't foresee. And then, it's like down the road, let's say a year from now, something happens. I'd love to have you back on for an update. So cool. Tell us about like, what was your expectations when you moved to Nashville? What did you think? You didn't know anything, right?
No, well, I was down here a couple of years ago doing a session, and I was here for about a week, and I just loved the pace of the session and how it went. And then even the lifestyle of it, just being here, it was great. So my girlfriend is also a songwriter. So she always fantasized about being in Nashville where, she could actually pursue songwriting. Whereas in New York, I pretty much started when I was like 16, 17 in like the club scene and doing weddings and stuff. And I had teachers that were like, there's no such thing as a session scene. And to me, I was always like, no, there still has to be there. So I always kind of, I went to school and I did that whole thing, but I really wanted to pursue the session thing. So even in New York, I started getting into the session thing. And then when I came here to visit, I was like, this actually exists. Mm-hmm. So it took me a while though to pull the trigger and come down here because I was thinking about it for a couple of years.
Did you know anyone?
I knew a couple of people maybe that moved from New York. I was a fan of a lot of people that like a lot of people's work down here, like Tom. And I just started reaching out before I moved, and what I noticed, everyone was super cool. Like everyone got back to me. Everyone was supportive and warm about it. So I was like, this might be a much more natural scene just to live in.
Right.
And actually get real experience from
So were you reaching out to these guys? Like when you say they got back to you, were you just like reaching out through Facebook or something or how are you doing that?
The funny thing is the first person I met down here, I was actually on the session down here. And after the session, we went to D's just randomly as the band. And I forgot who the act was. I think it was Patrick Sweeney, like a guitar, it was like a power trio guitar thing. And Steve Mackey was playing bass. Mm-hmm. I had no idea who Steve Mackey was at the time, but he just sounded great. And I just walked up to him and was like, hey man, you sound great. And it was an instant. It just felt like he was super warm.
Yeah. Steve's cool as shit.
He's really cool. And about a month later, my friend, an artist I actually played with, was like, hey, I got tickets to see Frampton at MSG. And I was just like, cool, I'll tag along. And it was pretty good seats. And I saw the bass player walk out and I was just like, that's the guy from D's. Like I had no idea it was him. So I reached out on Facebook and I was like, that was also incredible. And he super supportive. And at that point I was already thinking about making the move down here. And his, he was so kind and supportive. And I was just like, I think, again, I keep saying the same thing, but it just kept lingering in my mind where I was like, I think I have to make the move.
Yeah.
So about a year later, I moved in the pandemic, which I didn't think was gonna carry out this long, but it was worth it.
So when you got here, did you have a plan? Did you are you like, okay, because in essence, you moved down here without really knowing anybody that could make a difference in your life, right?
Yeah, not really.
So what was your plan? Just to get an apartment here and then just start beating the streets, trying to get a gig?
Yeah. It was,
that is like 100% musician reptile side brain. It's like, I just need to be on top of this rock where it's warm and the sun's going to hit me. No other plans other than that.
Yeah, no, it was like, I was in New York during the pandemic and I wasn't really nothing bad about New York. I grew up there. I was born there. So like, it was time to move anyway. And it was the perfect time during the middle of New York in the pandemic. I was like, let me move south. I'm already teaching online. Like I was teaching lessons online. I was doing the session work that I had in New York virtually anyway from home. So I was just like, this is probably the perfect time to go and just see if I like it. And
by the way, I think that's what it kind of takes.
Yeah.
It kind of takes the thought process like, okay, this could totally blow up. This could just blow up on the launch pad. It could be and I might be back in New York in a year. You almost have to do that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
If you're leaving a 6-figure job where you're a CPA and you're coming down with a wife and 6 kids and you need to move into a $500,000 house, this is not for you. You're never going to be able to use too much levity in your situation. You need a fluid situation where you could show up and say, hey, even if this all fails, I can just head back home.
Yeah, it's almost the kind of thing where I didn't even want to think about that because I was working in New York, but it wasn't satisfying. I wasn't satisfied with like the wedding scene and that stuff. It's all good work and the musicians doing it are great. It just wasn't my thing. And I always felt more comfortable in the studio and that working with songwriters and that whole thing just was more comfortable for me than, the New York City schlep, which was, it's a thing.
So you find, I guess, here you are. How long have you been in Nashville?
Since June. So almost a year.
Almost a year. But keep in mind, it's a pandemic. Everybody's head down. No one's really out. Like I haven't played a gig since March of last year.
Yeah.
The people are just like, they're all hunkered down in their spots. So it's different. It's difficult. But during that year, you've met us, right? Been hanging out at my studio and doing a bunch of work at my studio.
Yeah.
You've met Tom Bukovac and Steve Mackey.
Yes, Steve's a big guy.
Right?
Tom. Yeah.
And anyone else?
I'm trying to think. I reached out to Jacob Lowry. He's another session guy. Really awesome. I think later today, I'm actually going to go grab lunch with Tim Dembo. He's another session bass player. So I'm
What's
just
his name? You sort of glitched out there. Tim who?
Tim Denbo, I think his name is. I'm not sure. I just know he's awesome bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of writers that I've kind of started working with and kind of fell into just like recording demos. I had no idea. I still have no idea what I'm doing, and I'll put that right out there.
Right. He's a reluctant. We forgot to say this. He's a reluctant producer and mix engineer. He's sort of getting forced into it by just creativity. And this is like one of those stories where it's like you end up being Frank Filippetti, Frank Filippetti was a songwriter and everybody loved his demos.
Wow.
So now
is that right?
Yeah. And now he's a famous producer engineer, one of the best. And it's like, so you don't get to decide all the time, but you may end up being, the engineer of our time.
I'm completely open-minded to anything. So
good place to be.
Whatever works. I mean, in New York, as far as the reluctant engineering, my girlfriend's a writer and an artist. And we were just having trouble with finding the right studio and the right band. So I was just like, all right, I guess I'll try to help you figure this out. And she had a couple releases, and then a couple other bands started hitting me up. Nothing huge. It was just like indie projects that I was pretty much producing. I was lucky enough in New York, though, that I was connected to a couple really great engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just producing. So the engineers in New York were it was like I didn't have to think about anything technical other than just it needs to sound this way or that way, or I got to think more about arrangement.
What would you say your biggest anxiety about moving to town was? And was it realized over this last year, or how's it been?
Yeah, I think it's just working and meeting the right people. So far, meeting the right people before I moved was an anxiety thing. Now that I feel more comfortable here than I did in New York, as far as socially, even during the pandemic, and it's been limited, but the people I've met have been awesome. But another fear is just making sure, I want to deliver, because the pace here is different. The just the way a session works is so much more. I think it works. It's more functional. That's why it is what it is. But just to be able to deliver and just to stay on top of that, and not having.
Well, tell them what I asked you. I asked you. I haven't got to hear you play bass yet. Mike said you're a really good bass player, and I suspect that you are. You have like all of the accoutrements of a player. It's like funny. If you stand up long enough for me, you'd be able to say that guy's the engineer, that guy's the producer. If you went like to a cocktail hour, you'd be able to tell but you have all the accoutrements, all the handles of that.
Cool.
But tell us like what are we looking at, like in regards to your anxiety level was certainly high, but it's like now you've come to town, you don't have that anxiety.
No, I feel like I'm working in New York still, and the cost of living here is cheaper, so there's less anxiety on making it work right now. But I would like to transfer that work to here instead of.
I remember what I was going to say. My brain went schizo. When we were talking, what did I ask you? I said, could you sit in on a session?
Yep. Can you play?
Cut 5 songs in 3 hours? Because in Nashville, that's kind of what the expectation is. If you're rocking and rolling in a session, you're going to get 5 full tracks, a full band. So you're one of 5 people, and you're going to be tracking in a 3-hour union session. You're going to get 5 songs. So about every 36 minutes, you're going to be on to a new song that you've never heard, and you've got to be done when everyone else is done with your fixes. And then the guitar player has to play some overdubs. So as a bass player, you get the first 15 minutes of that.
Exactly.
So, and I asked, could you do that? And you're like, yeah, I think I could do that. But that's the anxiety. Like, I know when Near moved here, Near was used to the New York make records with Genesis, and you're there for the day getting drum sounds and like really digging into the nuance of every little sub rhythm,
Exactly.
But here it's a different pace where you've got to get a deliverable in 3 hours. And
I really like that, actually, because it's, to me, a little bit more organic, or a lot more organic. And that's how Melissa, my girlfriend, makes records. We've always done that, where she'll come to the session, here's the songs, and she had a band, but we would just knock out the rhythm, like the rhythm tracks in a day, like 4 or 5 songs in a few hours. And it was just always better that way. We didn't want to overthink the whole process. So that was the kind of work I was getting in New York. People were coming to me and wanting me to produce that way. And I had no idea that's how it was happening in Nashville. It was just more natural for me. Where in some projects I played on New York, and they were cool projects where it was so meticulous, where it was almost, we would end up going a little bit backwards. And
yeah, I know that.
Yeah, but it was, at the end of the day, it's still that product. But here, I've never done it here. I've done it in New York, but I've never been on like a union session yet. I've done sessions here like a full day, and we did a record in a day. But
have you worked with the number system yet?
Yes, actually, it's crazy because I was a terrible student in college. Like I went to music school because I had to.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Purchase College. Right in It was like maybe like 20 minutes from my house.
Sure.
And I lived at home, but that was my option of college. My parents wanted me to go to college, so I went there. And in ear training class, everybody was like these classically trained musicians, and I was playing in like my teacher used to sub me bar gigs, So I was in school, and I always thought of the number system again before I moved to Nashville. In ear training, I would talk in intervals instead of like solfege. And I remember my ear training teacher giving me a lot of crap for that. So I had to like write out the numbers and then the solfege on top. And so it just worked easier for me again.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say someone wants to move to Nashville. What we're anticipating the biggest roadblocks being is the actual decision to move, right? That's a big one. Once you make that decision, it's like, I guess you have to find, if you're going to come here as an engineer, producer, songwriter, or touring musician, the session guy, I guess what we would encourage you to do is get here. Most people I found when I called them like, hey, I'm going to be coming to Nashville next month, they'd all just say, call me when you get here.
Yeah.
Because so many people don't even show up for the trips they have scheduled in Nashville. So being here, everyone I think opens up a little more to you if you show up. And don't think that I made the mistake. I came to Nashville. I was living in New York City. I came to Nashville to work on an Emmylou Harris record. And I made some friends at the studio. Chad Carlson was one of them. Scott Pascal, who was the studio manager. But, I essentially moved down here just knowing a little bit of people. When I got here, it wasn't like they had a picnic waiting for me. It wasn't like they had opportunity waiting for me. It was kind of like, okay, you're here now. And then it's your job to woodshed and start to just like go out, see people, call people, show up. You've sat behind me on when I did the Olivado music mixes for the video. You sat me behind me for that. Then you came back and sat behind me either for Chase or Zach Emery record.
Chase, yeah.
Yeah, while I was mixing that record. And then you've been out here. We put some shelves up at the barn. Next thing you know, he's, hey, let me come on out. I can be here tomorrow too. And, that's the kind of stuff. And now when I have an option to call somebody for something, who do you think I'm calling? Right? Yeah. I'm calling a guy like you.
Cool.
And that's sort of what it takes, my perception of what it takes to get into the inner circles in Nashville. It's like show up, be a hard worker, be someone that they want in the room, be persistent, and find a way to be a value add. You've continually done that. That's why I'm not worried about you. Plus, you've got the talent of being a bass player. So whatever your talent is coming to town, you got to be good at that. You have to put in your 10,000 hours and be ready to plug into the level of talent that's in this town, which is pretty insane and inspiring. You'll get better, but you need to be at a certain level. But you've got to also have this other value add where people want you in the room. We always talk about this, and I think that it may go above people's heads. Maybe they're not willing to hear it or ready to hear it. But if people do that, they show up here, they're a good hang, they bring value. People think, wow, that guy just did something really cool, showed up and helped me put up all these shelves. It's like, okay, if I have an opportunity, who am I calling? That's a guy I'm going to call. Because I know that if you take that stuff seriously and you give a shit about my shelves, of course. You think you're going to give a shit about my session? Of course you are. That's Absolutely. The next level. I know that guy's going to be great. I'm not going to have to have this pull him aside and say, hey, don't tell the bass player what to play.
Yeah.
Conversation,
Yeah.
So
I'm just happy to be here.
Shelves look great, by the way.
They do.
Yeah, they're very cool.
We had quite a little system going. Me and Tommy Hayes and Phil. It was like one guy had the drill, one guy had the level, one guy. It was like this. Great. Like being in an operating room. Scalpel.
So Phil, are you looking to basically be primarily a session player, or are you looking to do road work as well, or all the above?
I would say all the above. I'm open-minded. Again, I love the session thing. That's where I feel the most comfortable. And I like the creative process. The road thing is cool. I did that a little bit in New York. It's fun, but the session is, if I could, that's why I moved here, is to mainly do the session thing.
I think that you'll find that once the touring world comes back, that is usually, I think if you would look at the process of every person, like Steve Mackey is a touring monster. He's out with John Oates. He's out with, I think he was he out with Steely Dan? He's out. Some of the people he's out with, I'm like, holy shit, what a great.
Yeah.
Well, but he's been on so many great tours, but he's also he's right up there with every top bass player in town for getting calls for sessions. So I think you're going to find that it's once the touring world comes back, you end up going out on the road. And the beautiful thing here in Nashville, folks, is that you go out, the bus calls Thursday night, right? You get on the bus Thursday, you travel, you play your gig Friday, you play your gig Saturday, and then usually you're back at the Target parking lot offloading on Sunday morning, which leaves you in town to do sessions on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
That's perfect.
So like the Danny Raiders of the world, he was out with Keith, he's working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, being the ACM guitar player and utility player, specialty instrument player of the year. And then he's out on the road with Keith playing, touring with him on the weekends. And that's sort of the way it happens. And even when you get to the point like where Danny, it's like, he's one of the top utility guys in town, if not the top. It's like, he doesn't have to tour, but he still tours, so it's just it's a cool little ecosystem. You can make a lot of money doing it once you get plugged in.
Totally. Yeah, I'm down with it all.
Same thing with let's say the songwriting world. You got to kind of come to town, and then it's just like you got a woodshed. You got to find your people. I always tell people that they're really surprised. You don't know how it's going to be. You just got to get to town, and then you think it's going to be one way, and then you just live your life. You look back a year later, and you're like, oh, I would have never guessed that I would have met so-and-so in line waiting at the Bluebird to audition for their open mic. And I met this guy through my wife's cousin, he's a songwriter. And this guy, next thing you know, you're writing with them and starting to have success. Next thing you know, their publisher is loving all the songs that they write with you. And they're like, what's up? I want to meet that dude. Next thing you got a publishing deal, but you could never sitting in your apartment in Yonkers, you'd be like, this is what my house going to be. I'm going to get there. I'm going to send some demos around. I'll get signed to a publisher, and then I'll be writing for a publisher and get my first hit. Yeah. You never will imagine the way it will be, but it will be a story. When you look back, you'll be like, I can't believe how I got here. But yes, this is the long winding road of that.
Yeah. When I was in Yonkers, I think I was just happy I just wanted to be there. I had no expectation. I didn't know if I was going to do the session thing. I didn't know if I was going to try to do the producing thing. It was totally, let's just go and see what happens. I was sitting having breakfast with Melissa, and I looked to my left, and there's Gordon, Moat, Jimmy Lee, and Near. I was too scared to say something, but I'm just like, this is the town I want to be in. It's like These guys I've been looking up to for years, and they're just sitting right next to me having breakfast.
That's wild.
Like, okay, this is where I think I made the right decision.
There used to be a place, I don't think it's there anymore. The Nashville Diner is not on the West End anymore, Mike, is it?
No.
I went to the Nashville Diner, and Mike's microphone is working. Isn't it glorious?
Yes.
He just gently said, no. And we heard it crystal clear.
And the gate didn't close it up on me.
It wasn't. What's that, Mike? I was over at the Nashville Diner, and I was sitting there, and in the booth right 3 feet away from me was Robert Plant.
Oh, wow.
In a little half booth, like a single person booth. And he was reading his paper, and his spectacles were all the way down on the end of his nose. And he was having a bit of tea while he was enjoying just a morning, what I imagine was before session. And I was just like, holy shit, Robert Plant.
Yeah.
It's some unearthly urge to go over and foist myself in front of him was put down by my own better senses. Like, I felt obligated that I need to go over there and make myself part of this guy's consciousness, make sure that he knows that I exist.
I heard the story about Robert Plant coming, he got off an airplane at the airport. He just walks up to the Hertz rental car or Avis rental car and rents a Chevy Impala. So he just cruises around town. He's just total normal dude.
That's a great point. So you will also find this out. So my story is I grew up in Pittsburgh, worked 8 years at a studio there, moved to New York City, spent a decade there, blindly, not knowing anyone in New York City. Moved from New York City to Nashville, and we've been here 15 years now. Oh. And my expectation of all the mile markers along the way, which were like, hey, I just got a publishing deal. Hey, I just worked on a record that's on a major label. Hey, I just mixed a record that's a hit. Hey, I just had this other thing that was just won a Grammy, just had a #1. All those things are incredibly good. They're not at all what you perceive. It is Robert Plant going up to the rental car. It's not what your career, no matter how good it goes, is not going to be what you think it's going to be. Mike's had songs that have charted, in the top 30 Billboard charts. And he had something that was in a video game that made a boatload of money from a licensing deal and had all these other hits that he's Britney Spears. But Mike Shimshack, I guarantee you, we all end up at the rental car company renting the Ford Taurus. Totally. It is not the long limousine showing up, with the guy who talks about Sammy Davis and Spinal Tap.
Right.
You know, it's not that. Your world is like nothing is going to be. Your move here is not going to be what you expected, but it is going to be a great trip. It's going to be a great journey. It's not going to happen the way you think it happens, but first of all, you got to show up, which distinguishes you from everyone else. And then you just got to like live it. You got to play it, ad-lib it.
I'm curious to know what the pros and cons are, Phil, as you see it, having been here in 1 year. What are the pros?
Well, I've only seen it during a pandemic, so I'm sure there's way more pros that I haven't seen yet. The people here, that's definitely like the community and the Robert Plant at the rental car place. You see people that you've looked up to for years just doing their everyday life.
Right.
You don't bother them. You're just here. And instead of I forgot who told me this when I first moved here. They were saying, you're not going to make it here if you're angling somebody. Like if there's like trying to get work or if you're trying to do that, which I like better because I'm just looking to like hang. Like I'd rather hang with people that are doing it. And usually they're like-minded anyway, and just learning as much as I can. So that to me, there's a community for that. In New York, it wasn't as much. It was more like goal getting, and you're doing your thing. And there's not as much community. Here, I would say that's the number one pro. Cons here, I haven't really experienced any yet, to be honest. I'm not just saying that, like I'm 100% satisfied with the choice of being here, even during the pandemic. The only thing I miss is like a good slice of pizza in New York. That's honestly, like if you asked about cons, that's it. But so far,
Mike, what would you say the cons are? You were in Nashville or in New York City for how long?
Almost 11 years.
And how long have you been in Nashville?
10 years.
Okay. So what would you say whenever you moved here, what would you say your perception of over these 10 years? What are the cons for you?
I mean, I think the cons to me are that I still feel like the music I personally make doesn't necessarily fit into what Nashville is known for. And so Nashville's slow to change. It's very slow to change. And they're very resistant to what's been going on with the city blowing up and the whole thing. That's, their city effectively has been invaded. So I kind of understand it to some degree. That's probably the biggest con to me is that,
how about from a business standpoint, though? From like those are more logistics. Like, it's a cultural thing. And I think part of what we experience being from New York, the three of us, is that you kind of know where you stand quite a bit in New York. That's the pro to me of like, they'll tell you they don't like it. I had this meeting with this guy at Epic Records. I mean, I was probably only in New York for maybe a year or two at this point. I took a meeting with this guy and he ripped my music to shreds in front of me. Of like, he would sit there. He's like, all right. The verse is okay. All right, I like this pre-chorus. He's like, dude, give me the chorus. And it was literally like that. And he was like, no, it's all wrong. I was like, shit, man. Like, but I left his office and I knew it. And there were some songs he really liked. I knew exactly where I stood with him. And that might've been an extreme version of New York to me. But generally speaking, I kind of felt like I knew a little more where I stood there. I think culturally here, it's considered rude to do that to people.
I agree.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's cultural. It's like they're very polite in the South. And that is, I think there's a lot of like, hey man, yeah, this is really great. I'll give you a buzz. And you just never hear from them again.
I think you're probably, I think you've nailed that. And I think people have learned in general that they don't want to be the ones that talk shit on the Beatles and then the Beatles become the Beatles. And then they were the guy that on YouTube being interviewed that was shitting on the Beatles and saying they would never make it. So I think people are more conscious of what they're committing to signing off on it as a statement. I would say that the positives are overwhelming. I think the people are great. It's a town where I was working on records that had budgets of $850,000 for the record budget in New York City. Wow. And I couldn't get the A&R guy on the phone. Like I couldn't call epic and get dude on the phone. And it was like, there was an A&R guy. Who was it? Who owns A&M Octone? Oh, I know they're not a thing anymore.
Box and Bomb, James Diener.
Yeah. I think it was James Diener. Every time I'd meet that guy, he'd act like it was the first time I met him, and I'd done like multiple records. But in Nashville, I could call and get the president of Sony Publishing.
That's one of the really great things about Nashville. Everybody's successful.
And it was like I had a deal that they were trying to restructure with me at Sony ATV when I was signed there as a songwriter. And the president called me, and I wanted them to do something that was non-traditional for them. They wanted to throw a bunch of money at me, and I was like, no, let me revenue share in this, the different business angle. And he's like, we just had never had that. He called me back 3 days later, the president of Sony, and was like, I was walking, thinking about you this morning in my driveway, walking down my driveway. It's got a long driveway. And he's like, what if we did this? That would never happen in New York. So you can get Tom Bukovac on the phone. You can call me and come over and sit behind me and have coffee with me. You can get Steve Mackey to like actually maybe recommend you for a gig if he thinks you're good enough. You'll get that in Nashville. Those are the positives. And there's a level of talent here that is inspiring. So my level of just the intensity went up because I was swimming with sharks that were like 21-foot, great whites now that it was so fast that you had to be great instantly. That was a great learning curve when I came to Nashville. It was inspiring. It wasn't dejecting or like I didn't feel like that was a negative. I felt like it was actually I was inspired by it.
Songwriting wise, it's
and engineering wise,
whole different level,
and performance wise. I mean, I think in every category, the level of inspiration that happens so quickly in these sessions, from a performance, from a recording, and from a producing standpoint, is pretty incredible. The negative is people don't do anything. You take I, in essence, stopped taking meetings because they were just bullshit. You would get in there and it'd be like, we're going to do this and this. And you left there feeling like this is going to be a great thing. We're about to do it. And then you won't even get a phone call back. Oh. So there's a lot of inaction, a lot of action where like, this is what's about to happen. We're going to do this. I'm going to call this person. We're going to send it here. We're going to do this. We're going to sign it. We're going to do that. And then it's just like you never had the meeting. You'll never get an email or a phone call from that person. So there's a lot of that. My other negative is that Nashville has become such a bound up town that people, where there used to be over 1,000 signed songwriters, now there's much less. And even within the fabric of that, they've teamed up so heavily that in order to get a cut or get a song heard, it's very difficult. Yeah. You have to be, it's almost always, you've got to be in the right camp. And when you hear, I was just listening to something on the radio and I said, the artist wrote that, because it was a new Luke Bryan song. Me and Zach were driving my son and I was listening to the radio. My car has a radio in it. I just figured that out this week. So we were listening to the country radio. I'm like, we're going to listen to country radio and see how it is. And we're just listening to the local yokel, whatever. And on comes a Luke Bryan song. And my son almost like swerved into incoming traffic because he hated it so much, wanted to end it all. And I was listening to it and I was just like, I know he wrote this. And not that Luke's a bad songwriter. He had, a couple hits as a songwriter before, but not everything he's writing is great. And I guarantee you on his record, there's got to be, if it's 10 songs on the record, I would guess that all 10 are his name's on them. And it's like, are those the best songs? And I'd like to believe in a world like where an Alan Shamblin song and great songs like that do still get cut, like The House That Built Me, or I Can't Make You Love Me If You Don't, Mike Reed, but when you hear these songs on the radio, most of them are eaten up. The camps are like, if you're writing with Lee Brice, you're going to get in hanging with him and drinking with him, you're going to get on those records. And maybe they cut one song that's just, they can't not cut it because it's such a genius song. And maybe that's the case. Right. But I bet you if you look at these records, there's 90 to 100% of them have the artist's name on it. So that's a downside to Nashville. You've got to either be able to go and fit in and live a life like almost like you join a motorcycle gang where you're like going to be going to the bars and hanging out and staying on the row till 6 a.m. and then going to write at 10 and just living that life and trying to weasel your way in. and, or write a song that's a once in a lifetime song or once every couple year song, depending on your level of craftsmanship. I'd like to believe they still get cut, but much, much less. So I would say that's the other downside of Nashville. And the only other thing that I don't like about Nashville is that Mike said it, it's slow to change. So that means it's slow to correct too. So it's slow to change its course from Kenny Rogers to Rascal Flatts. It's slow to make that change, but it's also, and then it's slow to make that change to, what's the guy, Sam Hunt, and then it's like, now we're on to the newest Morgan Wallen. It's slow to make those changes, but it's also slow to correct from just drivel, like music that is, when you listen to it, you're like, come on, we're better than this. That's just like, so it's really slow to auto correct and get to another genre that actually, and I don't know that we're heading in the right trajectory, but so I would say those are my criticisms. I try to stay out of Music Row. I'm very happy consciously. Like, I want to build empires out of Nashville that don't require a lot of people involved. I find that when a lot of people are involved, there's a lot of incompetency. People don't care about it as much as you or push it as hard. Mike's developing a band that's kicking ass right now and about to explode and go to the next level. It's doing that because it's a small crew of people. So I would encourage people to plug in, get as many sessions as they can, create with as many people as they can, but also have some things on their schedule that is like, I'm now an entrepreneur and I'm going to develop this thing and I'm going to control it so that I know it can be great and deliver it. That's what I would say.
That's awesome.
Do we miss anything?
No, I think that's it. It sounds like Phil's glad he made the move though. So that's nice to hear.
Absolutely. And the writing world, to me, that's a whole new thing. I've never experienced that until I came to Nashville. So I had no idea about co-writes or any of that stuff. I was always just a bass player on a session until I moved here. So that whole world and everything you just spoke about, it's all brand new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Phil was telling me, like, he'll end up like, he's got a guy who's got a record deal. Is it a publishing deal? Artist publishing deal?
I think it's both.
Okay. He's got it. And this guy's like, he's been like working with Phil and like pushing Phil, like, hey, grab a keyboard. Oh, great. We don't have to use a regular piano. Then we can now look at all this synth stuff. And now Phil is like reluctantly producing and engineering, ending up doing these records from a guy who's got a deal. And it's like, Phil is like, okay, it's adjacent to what I do, but he's not saying no. That's another brilliant move, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
You just have to go with, you got to do whatever it is that is opportunity. Find a way, if it's coconut day, find coconuts to sell. That's part of the luxury of being in the music business.
Absolutely.
So going with the flow. So awesome. Thanks, Phil. You're an awesome dude, man. And we're going to try to follow up with Phil, and we're going to have Eli on, and we'd love to, like, when there's a notable thing, maybe a year from now, we'd love to hear what your experience is this next year after COVID and see where you're at. Maybe you're out on the road with someone. It'd be great to just sort of, when there is a reason for you or just enough time has gone by to reconnect and hear what your status is.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
I think a lot of people could live vicariously through you. If they don't have the guts to do it, maybe you could be their virtual self doing it.
Hopefully.
You got a lot of pressure, man. A lot of people counting on you.
Just trying to make it happen.
Well, thanks, buddy. That's it.
Thank you, guys.
Signing off from the West Bar, and this is Joe West, Mike Shimshack, and Phil Anthony. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.